On November 9, 2021, two countries found themselves on opposite sides in the world. That afternoon, during the 76th session of the UN General Assembly, there was a vote on making access to food a basic human right. Out of 180 countries, everyone voted in favor except for Israel and the United States, who voted against it. This is the fourth time in a row that the two countries have blocked this resolution because once it's passed, Israel's actions in Palestine will face even harsher condemnation from the international community. This is just one of many examples of how the US will go against the world to protect Israel. Since 1972, the US has used its veto power at least 53 times to block any UN resolutions that might be unfavorable to Israel. In just over 200 years, the US has built the most powerful hegemony on the planet, which is pretty miraculous. What's even more surprising is that this tiny country, Israel, has only been around for a few decades but manages to manipulate this powerful empire so deeply. Among all of America's allies, this is totally unique. Even considering Israel's strategic value in the Middle East, it's hard to fully explain the empire's actions. When it comes to strategic importance, Europe is even more significant to the US, especially with its closer ties to Britain. It hasn't even pretended to stick to the values it's always promoted, which shows that there's definitely a powerful and unique variable within the empire that fills the gaps in the cause-and-effect chain. So today, we're diving into the strong and mysterious Israeli lobbying group and how it built an incredibly efficient political machine in the US in just a few years. In September 1953, when Israel ignored the UN ban and tried to build a canal to siphon water from the Jordan River, then Secretary of State Dulles quickly announced he was cutting off diplomatic aid to Israel. The impact was immediate. Just a month later, Israel scrapped the water project. There are plenty of similar examples from that time. Israel didn't always have a special place in the US alliance. Back then, the US was already giving Israel a lot of aid, but just like its relationships with Japan and South Korea today, the US could effectively keep Israel in check. In 1956, the US easily convinced Israel to pull back from the territory it had taken from Egypt. This influence allowed the US to benefit from the tensions between the Arab world and Israel by acting as a referee in the Middle East. This reflects the original intention of the US to support Israel, but starting in the mid-1960s, US policy in the Middle East began to tilt uncontrollably towards Israel. A major sign of this was Israel managing to get the US to turn a blind eye to its nuclear weapons program. In 1963, then President Kennedy entered into a long standoff with Israel over its nuclear weapons development. Kennedy's strong opposition put Israel's nuclear plans in jeopardy, but everything changed when his successor, Lyndon Johnson, took office. According to a report by journalist Seymour Hersh, in 1968, then CIA Director Richard Helms told President Johnson that Israel had effectively acquired nuclear capabilities. Johnson was really annoyed and just wanted to get Helms out of the White House as quickly as possible. From America's standpoint, if something like that happened, Johnson, as president, had to take action. But clearly, something was making him hesitate. On the flip side, US support for Israel actually became even more generous. Even when it went against US interests, the support never stopped. In fact, America's increased backing didn't boost Washington's influence over Israel, it actually weakened it. For example, during the Nixon administration, instead of threatening to cut off aid to get Israel to back the UN Resolution 242, they privately promised to give them extra fighter jets. After Israel occupied the Golan Heights in Syria, almost every country, including European allies, opposed the US, but once again, America stood against the world and helped Israel resist international pressure. This is definitely damaging. There's a lot of evidence showing that the rules of the post-war world system set by the US changed subtly in the mid-60s, especially in US-Israel relations. It's not hard to spot this shift in America's public foreign policy, but figuring out what was happening with pro-Israel groups in the US during that time is the tricky part. The reason its influence has grown so quickly mainly boils down to two challenges. First, ever since World War II, talking about Jewish people, especially when it comes to negative information, can be risky. Not many people are willing to take the chance of being labeled anti-Semitic, which makes it hard to find available resources, especially reliable and serious research materials. The famous American international relations theorist John Mearsheimer once wrote a book called The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. This book originated from a paper he was commissioned to write for The Atlantic in 2022, but for some undisclosed reasons, it couldn't be published for a while. Another challenge is that the Israel lobby isn't as neatly organized or hierarchical as many people think. Instead, it's a vast, decentralized network made up of hundreds of political action committees, business alliances, foundations, NGOs, and more. To understand why the Israeli lobbying group rose to power so quickly, we need to tackle another closely related question: who are the Jews? On May 14, 1948, the same day Britain ended its mandate in Palestine, Israel declared its independence. The Constitution stated that Israel is a Jewish state, but at that time, the Jewish population in Israel was less than 700,000. They urgently needed to attract Jews from around the world to strengthen the nation. However, figuring out whether new immigrants were actually Jewish turned out to be a pretty tricky issue. Jews, who are always spread out all over the world, come in different skin tones, speak various languages, and have all sorts of lifestyles. There's such a huge internal diversity in this group that you probably won't find another like them anywhere else. This is linked to the unique way they maintain their heritage. Jewish religious law, or halakha, states that if a person's mother is Jewish or if they convert to Judaism, then they're considered Jewish. Throughout the long and harsh history of the Jews, this rule has really helped with passing down their identity. In the past, when productivity was low, women and children often survived as the spoils of war. So, when one tribe wiped out a Jewish community, the Jews didn't just disappear. Instead, they continued their lineage through the maternal line in a new tribe. Plus, any girls born in that new tribe could also be recognized as Jewish, helping to spread the Jewish identity further. This means that no matter how little Jewish ancestry a person actually has, they can still be recognized as Jewish. In fact, according to halakha, even if someone has no Jewish blood at all, they can still be considered Jewish if they want to convert to Judaism. For decades, scientists have been using modern genetic techniques to try to find genes that could identify the so-called Jewish people, but they haven't had any success. Israeli geneticist Raphael Falk summed it up by saying that genetic continuity can only be detected within different Jewish subgroup communities, not across different Jewish populations. There's no identifiable so-called Jewish gene. In other words, genetic markers can't determine Jewish ancestry. So, it might be more fitting to think of the Jewish people as a Jewish community, as it's a group that relies more on cultural identity and shared economic interests. For example, the matrilineal rule that Jews use for inheritance has led to an unexpected outcome. Since the requirements for lineage are pretty low, many exceptional people throughout history have been labeled as Jewish. This has fueled the legend that Jews possess some kind of unique wisdom. It spread and became part of what keeps Jewish cultural identity alive. Also, throughout European history, Jewish communities have been known for their skills in finance and business. Nowadays, when Europeans try to explain why Jews have been successful in finance, they often say it's because Christian teachings prohibit usury, so those business opportunities ended up going to the Jews. But that moral reasoning doesn't really hold up, especially when you consider how much money can be made in that industry. The core of the finance industry really comes down to interest rate spreads, borrowing money at a low rate and lending it out at a higher rate to the right people. The unique characteristics of Jewish society give them a special advantage in this area. In everyday economic activities in ancient Europe, ethnicity was a major factor. Borrowing and lending within the same ethnic group often had lower interest rates compared to between different groups. Unlike other ethnicities, Jews had almost no bloodline barriers when it came to accepting outsiders into their community. A businessman could become part of the Jewish community by converting to Judaism or through marriage. He can take advantage of the low-interest funds available in the Jewish community, making it easier for him to succeed in business. This economic benefit can attract more business elites to join the Jewish community, which makes their resource advantage even more apparent. This setup has turned the Jewish community spread across different countries into a network that can quickly integrate local business leaders. In other words, it seems like Jews have always been associated with elites, but it's not because there's something special in their blood or genes that makes them more likely to produce geniuses. Instead, various elites are more easily absorbed into Jewish society. After World War II, the US emerged as a global superpower and became a hub for many elites, making it a key country for Jewish elite influence. This is why, in just a few decades, Jewish lobbying groups have managed to spread across multiple sectors in the US and gain significant power. Right now, there are about 18 million Jews worldwide, with over 7 million in Israel and around 7.6 million in the US. Plus, the elite crowd in the US spans politics, finance, media, tech, and business. You've got Trump's son-in-law Kushner, Biden's son-in-law Klein, Secretary of State Blinken, and Treasury Secretary Yellen, all Jewish. But this group is mainly built on shared interests rather than blood ties, so to keep things stable, they need to put their members through some serious loyalty tests. Rewarding those who contribute more and are more loyal while excluding freeloaders who just want benefits without putting in effort and rebels who ignore the collective good leads to another outcome. American elites who choose to join or marry into the Jewish community often act very active and aggressive to boost their status within it, even at the expense of the country's interests. On October 11, 2023, a truck doing a human search was circling around the Harvard campus, plastered with photos and names of several Harvard students, along with a banner that read Harvard's leading anti-Zionists. This truck showed up after 34 student groups at Harvard released a joint statement supporting Palestine, effectively exposing personal information like home addresses and phone numbers through this kind of targeted harassment. For years, this has been a tactic used by the Jewish community to intimidate opponents, and it's often done out in the open. A staff member from the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee explained that retaliation shouldn't be done behind closed doors, instead, it should aim to grab public attention and showcase their strength. If nobody knows, people won't be afraid of you. This kind of public revenge has another layer of meaning. In Jewish society, a person's status is directly related to how much they contribute to the community. For example, the board members of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee are chosen based on their financial contributions to the organization. Clearly, this kind of rule encourages members to show their value to the group in various ways. When an adversary shows up, publicly retaliating against them is one way for members to demonstrate their loyalty and worth. In Jewish society, those in higher positions are more likely to use their resources to openly strike back at adversaries, which helps solidify their status. As a result, the entire Jewish community tends to have a pattern where radicals gain power, and those in power become even more radical, especially in this incident. American Jewish billionaire Bill Ackman was the first to pressure Harvard University to release the names of the students involved in a statement, making sure his company would never hire them. Following him, a dozen CEOs joined in the pressure. With such intense job market pressure, various Harvard student groups gradually retracted their signatures, and this pressure wasn't just about outside threats. It also points to a group of American Jews who formed a new organization called BRERA in 1973. They called for Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories and to discuss a peaceful resolution with the Palestinians. Representatives from this organization even met privately with a group of Palestinian representatives. Soon after, a strong backlash emerged from major American Jewish organizations like the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the American Jewish Committee, and the National Jewish Community Relations Advisory Council, all condemning BRERA. The Jewish Community Organization revoked BRERA's membership, and the local Jewish Community Council stopped funding and providing space for them. The entire Jewish community's resources were cut off, and 5 years later, BRERA was forced to shut down. This situation turned the Jewish community into a highly unified group that was very sensitive to external threats, and it also led to the emergence of a powerful pro-Israel lobbying group. American political scientist Robert Taliaferro once described the major Jewish organizations in the Israeli lobbying group as having a large, well-trained membership with plenty of financial backing. They have specialized teams for specific issues and a tight internal communication network to coordinate resources at both local and national levels. Former official of the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, Stephen Rosen, once put a napkin in front of New York Magazine editor Jeffrey Goldberg and referred to himself. Getting 70 senators to sign off in 24 hours shows how the Israeli lobbying group won't hesitate to hit back against any uncooperative officials or lawmakers. They're quick to cut off political donations and threaten to support their opponents. This tough approach makes it hard for people to challenge their views. So even though Jews make up only 2.4% of the total U.S. population, their influence in the business world is way bigger than that percentage would suggest, thanks to the Israeli lobbying group. The strength of the Jewish community isn't some conspiracy theory about a secret organization of mysterious elders plotting to take over the world. In reality, the tighter the organization, the harder it is to withstand the test of time. Throughout history, any small change could lead to its downfall. Instead, the Jewish community has developed a set of traditions that really help it thrive and spread. By drawing in and converting elites from other groups to strengthen their own power, and by using a code of conduct that tests members' loyalty, they maintain the group's cohesion. On a deeper level, this set of rules highlights and amplifies the more self-serving, aggressive, and arrogant sides of human nature that are strongly tied to elitism. As long as these traits of human nature still exist, he'll keep gaining endless vitality. Whether it's the so-called Jewish wisdom that supposedly leads to easy business success or the conspiracy theories about some mysterious Jewish elder controlling the world, they actually serve to strengthen the elite image of Jewish society and boost its appeal. The best way to deal with this is to debunk all the myths and legends surrounding it. Those who think they're a cut above the rest and look down on others can be reminded of an old saying from the East: ignorance isn't what holds you back in life, it's arrogance that really gets in the way.